I painted this in the style of a nostalgic black and white photo for you. Listen. Sankofa. To go back, to go back, to go back to the wisdom, to our riches, our prisons, the power of the bones. Sankofa. To go back to tribal living, so no one walks this road alone. To find balance and reciprocity, so the winds don't sing the blues and moan. And in our very ancient essence, we grow strong. Sankofa. To go back from the babies to the elders grown. Individualists in our lineage, we need to correct this wrong. Sankofa. To go back to universal love, to reflect the sweet memories of our departed beloved. Sankofa. To go back to correct the earth and change for the fate of what's above. Sankofa. To go back to be a snake charm as smart, but as harmless as a dove. Sankofa. Go back to the water and remember the slaughter of those we know not by name, to hear their voices in the rhythms of the waves, and to give thanks to Oru or Shupa for rotating our days. Sankofa. To go back to our ancestors and recover Ijinle ways. Sankofa. To go back to remember our triumphs, our struggles, and how well they switched hats so that we might find our place to keep the legacies intact. Sankofa. To go back to where spiritual intelligence was regarded as fact. Sankofa. To go back to restore the ancient values and rescue the things the untruths love to say we lack. Sankofa. To go back.
Spiritual Sankofa, a stolen legacy.
Welcome to the Spiritual Sankofa, a stolen legacy show, a BGN a Black Gold Media production. This is where we discuss in this show all things spiritual in an effort to learn, to understand, and to reclaim our African spirituality. Your show panelists are myself, Sister Akita, and Sister Fabu. Hello, Sister Fabu.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome. Our fourth show in May was with guest speaker, Dr. Tutmase, discussing the impact of spirituality on mental health. Dr. Tutmase did an excellent job in giving us the opportunity to think about our own mental health issues and the challenges we face, but also in addressing the mental health concerns that affect us as a people, such as access to care, the impact of not acknowledging our need for mental health. And he also discussed the spiritual connection of mental health, which is important for us to make that connection. Spiritual well-being, mental well-being, they're all connected. Spiritual well-being, our mental well-being is connected. We took a short break and did not air a show in June. So here we are into July, which is BIPOC, Mental Health Month. BIPOC is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Mental Health Month, BIPOC, Mental Health Month. So today we're here with a follow-up of shorts because it was only fitting to bring back Dr. Tutmase to continue to discuss mental health in the Black community. And also our audience from the last show who didn't get their questions answered may have the opportunity to do so today. So let me introduce our guest speaker once again, Dr. Tutmase. I will read his bio quickly. Anthony P. Young, Doctor of Psychology, also known as Dr. Tutmase, an African name he has chosen. Dr. Tutmase is the Mental Health Institute Quality Assurance Analyst for the Colorado Department of Human Services. He is the past national president of the Association of Black Psychologists and a founding member and current president of the Denver Rocky Mountain Association of Black Psychologists. He has over 40 years of experience in the areas of clinical in forensic psychology and criminal justice. Our distinguished guest also served as adjunct professor for over 32 years at the University of Colorado. His personal motto is do your best and let God do the rest. Dr. Tutmose, again, welcome to our show, Spiritual Sankofa Extolling Legacy. I only read a shortened version of your extensive bio. Are there any corrections or additions to the body of work or your personal history of who you are you would like to add at this time?
Just one point. I'm the son of Doris and James. I'm the father of Aisha, Jamila, Imani, and Latifah. I'm the grandfather of Angelique, Max, Cameron, and Bo. That's my most important credential.
Okay. Well, it looks like your personal motto, do your best and let God do the rest, is encompassed in all the work that you have done and continue to do. Thank you for being here and discussing mental health awareness for BIPOC Mental Health Month.
Thank you for having me. Hotel.
Since there's a lot to discuss, let us dive right into the questions we have for you, and we encourage our audience to post any questions they will have for you in the chat section to be answered toward the end of this show. Dr. Tutmose, although anyone can develop mental health problems, African Americans sometimes experience more severe forms of mental health conditions due to unmet needs and other barriers. Are clinicians today trained or better prepared to address the distinct aspects of healing for Black people than they have been in the past, especially since there are more BIPOC mental health professionals than there were in the past?
The answer to your question is no. We have certainly experienced mental health challenges since our ancestors were kidnapped and enslaved on this continent and in other places. So whatever mental health issue we have, it's certainly exacerbated by the fact that we have this history of oppression, of abuse, of white supremacy. So certainly that issue only exacerbates the normal challenges that human beings have. Now, all human beings suffer from depression and anxiety and any number of other psychological challenges. But our difficulty is certainly exacerbated by the fact that we also have to deal with white supremacy in a way that no other cultural group has had to deal with. Not to make comparisons, but certainly each of the BIPOC people have their own histories in dealing with white supremacy. Ours is unique, and I really would not make a comparison, only to state that all of us have had to deal with white supremacy since the Europeans began to colonize and spread poison across the planet. Now, the second part of your question is whether or not clinicians are better prepared today. And on one level, yes, we do know that there's more emphasis on addressing the mental health concerns of the BIPOC population. However, the universities and the colleges historically have done a very bad job at really providing cross-cultural training on psychological assessment and psychotherapy and diagnosis. So we know while on one hand there are more clinicians of color, they still tend to get the same Eurocentric education, and that's the problem.
Yes.
That's a major problem. So having more Black clinicians is very significant, but by itself it's not sufficient if they continue to get the same Eurocentric training. And that's the issue. That's why there needs to not only be more BIPOC clinicians,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to be properly trained to address the various populations effectively, rather than just saying, well, I'm Black, so therefore I know all about Black people. That's not true. In any field, we have to study in order to be effective. So we have to study ourselves, our own culture, our own history, our own healing practices, historically, being able to really be in touch and proficient, rather than just simply saying, well, I have a degree in psychology and I can do well. It's like, no, that's that is not enough. I think it's the first step, but definitely it's not enough.
That's definitely true, that if we do not know about our culture and we don't deal with the specific differences and that affects us, then how can they actually really truly address our mental health concerns properly?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's a little section in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition. That's the Bible or our reference book for psychology and psychiatry and many other behavioral health fields. And in the back of it, there's a little section on cultural bound disorders.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the various cultural groups have very specific experiences and histories. And we know that psychology itself is a cultural endeavor. Psychology is based upon culture. It informs us of what's normal, what's abnormal, what's healthy, what's unhealthy, etc. So you can't really separate culture from psychology because they're two of the same thing on many levels. The issue is that when it comes down to the psychosocial historical experiences of people of color, particularly people of African descent, we have very distinct racialized trauma,
Mm-hmm.
which is not the same for all of the other BIPOC communities. Each have their own. Certainly, we know that the Indigenous people, as we typically call them, of course, side notice that there were Black folks here from the very beginning, and that the Asians came over thousands of years later to this continent, but that's another issue. We know that based upon the genocide of the Indigenous people and the robbing of their land, they have a particular traumatic experience that has to be addressed. And all trauma is not created equal. Mm-hmm. On the personal level as well as on the cultural level. So being able to address that is so important. In fact, I'll point out that when we think about Chinese Americans, people of Chinese descent who live here, they have their own historical trauma, racialized trauma that needs to be addressed. But when clinicians are unaware of the histories that people continue to have to deal with, the trauma that actually stems from that, when clinicians are unaware of that, they can only address part of what may be going on with the client. Because we do know that whether or not people are conscious of their psychosocial cultural history or not, the fact is that trauma is transmitted from generation to generation.
Yes.
And that's in addition to whatever personal trauma people may have.
That's true. And I think you kind of touched on this in my second question to you, but in many communities, mental health problems are increased by less access to care, cultural stigma, and low quality care. Is there a measurable change or trend to better access quality care and to reduce the stigma? And as a follow-up to this question, what can we do in our community to help further this progress?
Okay. Well, I would dare say that there has been some progress made in as much that now intergenerational trauma and white supremacy have been identified as a major source of the psychological challenges that our people have currently as well as historically. However, there's been very, very, very little research done on that because you have to go back to the funding sources for the research, which is typically the federal government or some foundation. And historically, they've not been interested in addressing these issues. They just simply have not. It's not been on their radar. And the only thing we can do as a people to get that on their radar is to push these people who get elected, because they hold the purse strings, and also they're the ones who do the appointments, oftentimes for people who head up these various governmental agencies that actually control funding and also funding priorities. So we have to really hold them accountable, not just after they're elected the next day, but continuously. We have to make sure that our interests as a people are being addressed. Mm-hmm. What was it that our ancestors said, Frederick Douglass, that power yields nothing without a demand. So we have to demand those things which are in our best interest, and certainly for there to be funding to address these issues can only help. But we have to make the demand consistently and also persistently.
Okay, great. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen because
Okay.
I had a little trouble in trying to figure out how to actually introduce this next question I have for you. And for the audience, I wanted to show a couple of slides that will introduce that information. And these are two terms that I wanted to bring in and that we're going to discuss in this question that I have for you. Ubuntu is a Bantu term meaning humanity. It is sometimes translated as I am because we are, and also I am because you are, or humanity towards other. In Kuso, it means the belief of a universal sharing that connects all humanity. The second term was Swabana, which is another Zulu greeting that literally means I see you. And it's more than politeness. Swabana carries the importance of recognizing the worth, dignity of each person. It says, I see the whole of you, your experiences, your passions, your pain, your strengths and weaknesses, and your future. You are valuable to me. Swabana is also infused with the belief that when others see me, then I exist. The common response to this is Shaboka. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move my screen, which means I exist for you. Now, these are more than just words and terms. What they are talking about is values. And they are values that actually vitalize the other person by giving the full attention and presence, how they carry the value that they carry within themselves. So as I stop sharing my screen and get to the third question, oops, let's do a stop share. And I will get to my question that pertains to that. These two cultural words were struck to me as positive empowerment on our mental health. For someone to acknowledge me and see the whole me, to be able to feel that there's a connection between myself and another person. I think these are positive empowerment attributes for mental health. Can you discuss how our connection to African values and culture, such as African spiritual practices, healing circles, and these cultural values, such as Ubuntu and Sabana, can promote emotional well-being in Black communities? Please.
Well, if we have a few more hours, I can actually expound upon that a lot more. But
I know.
but
She
briefly,
did get into a lot, didn't she?
oh yeah, that's thick.
Yeah.
But let me give you a quote from Dr. Chancellor Williams. As you know, he's the author of The Destruction of Black Civilization and many other works. And what he talked about when I saw him back in the 80s during one of his presentations in Washington, D.C., is that he said we have been out of our African minds. We have been disconnected with who and what we are through space and time. Due to this ma'afa, we have actually been very well, with intention, disconnected from our culture, our history, who we are as a people, but fortunately not completely disconnected. But the fact of the matter is that we were so dominated and so conquered and so oppressed by other people, they imposed their values, their worldview upon us. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us just simply may understand this at some very, very deep spiritual level. Most people who look like us are not aware of it on a conscious level. And that's the problem, because we know that when we identify what our sources of strengths are, we know that our connection to one another is powerful. And also our connection with our ancestors and our connection with the Creator, however we name or define that. We know that we are the first human beings on the planet. And therefore, we're also blessed by having not only that connection, but but the fact that we were given the wealthiest, resource-rich part of the planet. So we're gifted in so many different ways, but yet we've been convinced to think that we're lesser than the people who had oppressed us and enslaved us. So we have a lot to do to return to our minds,
Yes.
to actually reclaim our history, our culture, and our own spirituality. Because on another note, we know that the religions that the Europeans imposed upon us were not ours in the way that they have translated them. Of course, there's a long discussion around that, but they came into Africa, learned about our ancient wisdoms. They learned how to pray. They learned how to think. They learned our various sciences. We taught them. They went back to the countries that came back, introducing to us the things that we knew already. And some of us drank the Kool-Aid. We actually began to ingest what they were saying as being true. Well, it's true from a European sense, but that's not our truth. That's not our reality. So we've been so bamboozled into taking on their perspectives, their worldviews, their values, that it is work that we have to engage in to return to our own source of wisdom and inspiration. Because otherwise we find ourselves still enslaved, not necessarily physically, but certainly mentally and spiritually. So we have to actually return to our own source and reclaim who we are. So I tell people that I speak with frequently doing presentations that our biggest strength has always been the fact that we are a spiritual people. We have that connection. It has nothing to do with religion. It has more to do with that original source, that original connection that was created when we were created, and that same connection that we have with each other on a very, very spiritual level. So being able to reclaim our history, to reclaim our spirituality, to understand it. And there's one thing that our ancient ancestors knew so well. And I can go back to Kevin and really talk about the fact that even though there were various aspects of the divine that they emphasized in different parts of their country, they did not have hostility or conflict about each other's belief system. We find ourselves being so divided against each other and ourselves that anything that has to do with religion can actually be quite divisive, because we've been taught not to tolerate belief systems which differ from whatever we were indoctrinated into. And that's one way in which we continue to be Willie lynched, rather than just simply realizing the fact we have the same source. What was the condition of our people before the destroyers came to our continent? We didn't have conflict about religion at all. That was not the issue. We may have had conflict, but it wasn't about that. Because even the ancients understood that there were various ways of connecting with and worshiping and honoring the Creator. So we didn't have that type of conflict. That's something which is quite Eurocentric. So as we find ourselves returning to some of our traditional faith-based traditions, African spirituality in its various forms, one way in which we can actually strengthen ourselves personally and also collectively is being able to understand that level of spirituality and that manner of worship or connection, if you will, so that we don't have to find ourselves in conflict with each other because of the various ways in which we seek to connect or reconnect with our Creator. So that's one of the challenges we have, because I grew up Baptist, for example. I grew up in Chicago on the South Side. And I can tell you, I remember very distinctly in my neighborhood on the South Side of Chicago, the Baptists had conflicts with the Pentecostals. Pentecostals had conflicts with the Catholics and the Baptists and the Lutherans, and we go on and on and on, the AMEs. There were people who were pitted against each other because of the manner in which they practiced their religion, if you will. So, and of course, I can also throw in Islam and the various other faith traditions that have always been at odds, believing that their way was the only way to connect with the Creator. So we have to realize that one of the sources of strength that we have is to recognize this type of gamery which has been played on us, and not continue to perpetuate that type of divisiveness among us, because certainly we have been conditioned to not function in our own best interest as a people. So being able to just recognize how we have been willy lynched and not continue that process is so important. And certainly religion has been one of the things which have been so greatly divisive among us. And that was planted intentionally by the people who had enslaved us. So we just have to be able to see beyond the veil and realize what has happened, and then to once again return to our source of strength spiritually. And that has nothing to do with religion. It has more to do with our own connection and how we seek to actualize that on a personal level.
That's so true, because as Blacks in America, there is power in reclaiming our spirituality, our African spirituality, and our humanity that was part of the culture, like I just talked about, the Zulu culture. Mm-hmm. The fact that we can actually see one another and see the value in one another. And so those are very important cultural values that help promote mental health and well-being.
Yes, and that runs totally counter to what this white society has always proclaimed, that we were 3/5 of a human being, if we were human at all, whether or not we have a soul from their perspective. So right. As we reclaim our humanity, we can just see through the lies which have been told and also perpetuated about us.
That's true. Well, you've done an excellent job in answering all of my questions. I had another question, but you actually answered it. So I'm going to take a quick break. And after we take this break, we will return with Sister Fabu, who has some questions to pose to you.
Fantastic. How long is the break? And I'll be sure to return on time. Okay.
It's just a very quick break. You are listening to the Black Gold Nation's media production of Spiritual Sankofa, a Stolen Legacy, hosted by Sister Fabu and me, Sister Akita. And today's topic is BIPOC, Mental Health Month. BIPOC is the acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. BIPOC Mental Health Month, with our honored guest speaker, Dr. Tutmose. You can visit our website at blackgoldnation.com for more information about us and how you can become involved. And as we continue on with the show, we want to remind our audience to place your questions in the chat section, and we would do our best to answer as many questions as time allows. We're going to get back to this very interesting show on mental health. Sister Fabu.
All right.
I know that I had talked a little bit in my first question about the clinicians' preparedness to addressing specific and unique issues in the African American community. And Dr. Tutmose did a great job in clarifying that. And you have a follow-up question regarding mental health professionals to address to Dr. Tutmose. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I want to take a breath because y'all covered a lot, man. Y'all went so deep. I know one that Dr. Tutmose asked how long the break gonna be. You need some water, brother? Y'all got real deep. I'm glad we did. I just want to go woosah because we are talking about BIPOC and Black mental, Indigenous Black people of color, then the mental health awareness. I kind of feel myself like I might be going through some mental health issues with all this technology going all kind of crazy. But I'm just going to take a deep breath. And the question that's followed up to that is, in looking at the mental health professionals, looking at the community, and looking at the healers, understanding that as healers, we meet clients where they are to address their mental health challenges. What are some of the things that you would say that helping providers should keep in mind when addressing mental health well-being in the BIPOC community? All of them, all the people that make up not only just Black, the Hispanics, the Asians. What should we know, the helping profession, as we meet people where they are?
Well, I would say first and foremost to just recognize their humanity. Recognize that despite all of the stereotypes that we've been taught about them as well as ourselves, we recognize them as being human beings, as being part of that divine creation, which we all are part of, and being able to have humility as they listen to people talk about their experiences. One of the worst things that can happen to a person who is seeking help is to be invalidated, to have someone discount and just minimize what you're going through. They have no idea really of what your personal history is, other than as much as you've chosen to share with them. So we have to be very mindful that what the people who we serve might share was only a small fraction of who and what they are.
So
And
to
to
me,
be
that sounds
open.
like to me,
No,
that
go ahead.
sounds like you're saying that these helping professionals should be culturally competent.
Well, yes, that's one way of saying. And in fact, there's a lot of terms which has been thrown around these last 40 years plus since I've done this work, from cultural sensitivity to culturally aware to what is it, culturally competent to culturally congruent, culturally informed. The bottom line is that they have to be aware of the psychosocial historical background of the people who they're serving. So that, which means they have to not only study and understand some of that, but also themselves, because we're told in the helping profession that we have to be objective, and there's no such thing as objectivity, because whatever we see, whatever we perceive, is through our own cultural lens. So there's no objectivity. I think that's one of the myths that we've been trained to believe. The fact of the matter is that we have to meet people where they are, which means we have to first and foremost do what the ancients told us: know thyself. And if we know that, it makes it a lot easier to connect with someone else's humanity. But too oftentimes in our training programs, our clinical training programs, if you will, we're taught uh, uh, that people are more or less objects. We objectify people. Now we're going to study about Black people. Now we're going to study about Asian Pacific Islanders. Now we're going to study about people of Hispanic descent, and on and on and on, rather than first looking at themselves and saying, okay, what is it about my history, my culture, that makes it necessary for me to do this extra work because I didn't get it in my graduate program.
So that would mean that would help them to connect better with the client that they're serving, correct?
Absolutely. And not only that, if they don't get this at the graduate level, it's their responsibility. They have an ethical responsibility to know about the people's background that they serve culturally.
Yeah.
Because, despite all of the training that we've had, I went to the University of Denver, and my training was quite Eurocentric. I learned about our people being among our people.
Yeah.
Studying our people, our history, our philosophies, our ways of knowing. So it's not something that I got in graduate school. It gave me that piece of paper, which was fine because it opened some doors. But the real education we have to seek on our own.
Right.
Because,
That's kind of like you're saying, interject yourself into your own culture, huh?
yes, you have to be aware of oneself before you can truly be aware of somebody else. And
And they
that's the
have to be aware
disconnect.
of the need to interject themselves into our culture, because I think a lot of African American health professionals have subscribed to the Eurocentric viewpoints and don't necessarily see their need to address the African spirituality, or not even the spirituality, but the African part of our culture,
Mhm.
and how it affects us.
Yeah, I've known some people who look like us who say, well, I'm just a psychologist who happens to be Black. And I tell
Yeah.
them, well, we just happen to be a fool because
You know
you were
what
Black
though?
first. You were
Even
Black
though,
first before you went into your profession.
and that's true with all of that, because the BIPOC acronym does highlight the difference between the lived experiences of each group instead of lumping them all together to explore
Mhm,
the relationships
mhm,
between the mental health care provider and the communities that they often serve.
mhm.
But even with that, even though many of us who were trained do have Eurocentric thought, would you not say that cultural and racial representation matter in therapy, counseling?
Oh, absolutely.
You
It
can
matters.
explain. I
Uh,
mean, even though we're saying that there's some of those that look like us, they, were Eurocentric trained, and they forget that to input themselves into the community. Still, even in the other cultures, and I say that because there are terms that we use in therapy and in counseling, and I've been, in that kind of
mhm,
position myself, where
mhm,
I tell a therapist that, well, yeah, we speak in tongue at my church, and we do this, and
mhm.
the therapist look at you, a white therapist, a Eurocentric therapist look at you as if
Uh,
you hallucinating, which will
uh,
lead to a misdiagnosis.
right.
So even though all that happens, wouldn't you say that representation on the cultural and ethnic level matter?
Oh,
And why does
absolutely.
it matter?
Oh, it matters absolutely. Because the more in tune we are with our own history and culture, and that of the person that we're serving, the better our healing process can be.
And
One,
fewer misdiagnoses.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. The problem is that um, people of the BIPOC community are usually studied as objects, as I mentioned. So it's not like these Caucasian clinicians really have to understand. They just need to be able to kind of fit it into the box, and the whole paradigm is about measuring and counting and being able to categorize rather than something which is more experiential, which is
Okay,
something that they really have to
be-
study.
before you go too deep, and I want to stay right there with this misdiagnosis, because
Uh-huh.
that's one of the reasons a lot of African Americans don't seek treatment and therapy
Hmm.
because of. Can you tell me the effects that misdiagnosis could have on a community that will keep them from going in, from even seeking access to care?
Hmm.
Because even though we have all of that kind of stuff that happens, there are some common things that happens to each group that's a part of the BIPOC community.
Hmm.
And there are some very unique things.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's like with the Asians and Hispanic, they look at mental health as if it were a physical
Right.
ailment, and they
Hmm.
will seek a medical doctor.
Hmm.
Whereas Black people look at it as a thing that's really uh, more a part of our wholeness.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Something, but we also look at it as if it was a weakness.
Hmm. Yeah,
And so,
and that's
and
mhm.
would you say that that's derived from a lot of misdiagnosis and, like you said earlier, the Eurocentric mindset that does not implant itself into the culture to understand what's really going on with people? I want us to kind of stay in that
Okay.
arena
Okay. Okay.
to really get a feel for why it was important that BB Campbell came back and said, okay, yeah, June is Mental Health Awareness Month, but we got to really be specific about Indigenous Black people of color. So we really want to, in this show, we really want to get why that is
Hmm.
so important.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Well, let's see. What part of the question should I answer first?
Just go for it,
Okay. Okay. Let me say first
one
and
bite at a
foremost,
time.
yeah,
Yeah, that
that
was a
when we
lot.
think about stigmas, each of the each community within the BIPOC community has its own history about stigmas. But overall, um, it's like stigmas say that someone who has a mental health challenge is weak. Um, they're not able to cope. They're crazy. There's all kind of negative terminology that that is used with people who have mental health challenges. So no one wants to be made to be weak or crazy or weird. But the fact of the matter is that our society, and I'm referring to white society because that's how we are all indoctrinated. From the womb to the tomb, we get that same type of indoctrination. Is that if you have a mental health challenge, it's like, well, that's something which is taboo. No one will be seen in a positive light because of that. So I'll tell you a very quick story, and this is real. When I was growing up in Chicago on the South Side, no one on the South Side ever had a psychotic break. Those of us who are clinicians, or therapists, know exactly what I mean. But no one on the South Side had ever had a psychotic break. But Uncle Joe, as they were called, had to go away for a while, and we were always asked, "What happened to Uncle Joe?" Well, he had to go away. He had to go down south. Well, the state hospital was down south, down in southern Illinois, or further south into the suburbs, because we had such this we had such a stigma about mental health, and to someone having a psychotic episode, that we even use different language. We would say they have a nervous breakdown. And we wouldn't say, "Oh, that they had a psychotic episode." They had a nervous breakdown, just like people would get too nervous and then they would just break down, right? So we had a whole different set of a terminology to describe what people were going through, but we knew there was a very bad stigma about someone who had psychological challenges. Now, one thing that we can do as a community is realize that these mental health challenges that we talk about, exist on a continuum. We have people who are very adept. They do everything well. As Spike Lee would say, they can only get more better. Then on the other extreme, we have people who are out of touch with reality. They may even need medication sometime because of the chemical imbalance in their brain. I mean, this is extreme, right? But most of us exist somewhere in the middle. And based upon what life's challenges are impinging upon our life, we may find ourselves going to one end of the spectrum or another, but it's a continuum. And being able to just realize that any mental health challenge, it could be depression, it could be psychosis, it could be anxiety, all of that is all part of this human experience. And when we tell ourselves, or we're being told not to accept that part of our humanity, that further takes away from who we are as a people. Rather than being able to say, just like someone can have a physical disorder, we have the psychological challenges as well. And that can happen to anybody at any time, and that it's okay to ask for help rather than being stigmatized. So that's one issue. And also when we think about the fact that, that when it comes down to misdiagnosis, clinicians can only function as effectively as a training. And most clinicians that I've met in my 45 years practicing in Colorado have absolutely no clue, if little at all, about the cultural experiences of other people other than Caucasians, because the theoretical models may be in personality theory or psychological testing, and we go on and on and on. It's based upon a Eurocentric model. There's one book by Dr. Robert V. Guthrie. The name of the book is Even the Rat Was White. Right. It's an excellent book. They talk about the history of racism, white supremacy, and psychology from the very beginning. But this is white psychology as a people, and I'm referring to our ancestors. We had our own term for psychology. It wasn't that Greek word, that Greek derivative that came from sarku, which is a Kemetic word that means the illumination of the soul or of the spirit. That was our psychology. We were studying the totality of what it meant to be a human being, whereas the Europeans went down to Kemet, studied for a while, came back after 20 or 30 years, and thought that they knew something, and they began to misinterpret a lot of what they had learned, and they came up with a lot of of
A lot of things.
other
I don't.
terms. Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off. It is 8:15, and we got
Oh,
so
okay.
much to talk
Okay.
about. What I really want to go back to is when we first started the show, and we were talking about African Americans in particular,
Mhm.
and the things that really set us apart. While you know, were very kind and saying you didn't want to just talk about us. You know what I mean? Just that really the things that really set us. How can you tell us how the very act of the enslavement of our people caused the repressed pain that gives us the psychosis of today that really makes us different and unique from other groups. I mean, we need to
Oh.
talk about that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I know our audience may have questions, and we vowed to our audience that we would keep our show at an hour.
Okay.
And we just got, I mean, we could go on, and we may have to have you back. You know, but I really want to, in this show, get to that thing that really made Africans of the diaspora and Africans in America, Africans, well, the diaspora covers the worldwide, that really made our mental health different. I mean, the images. What does it do to have your children watch you as a man be hung or be beat? What does it do to the psychology? And then he has repressed pain, and then it goes for, you said earlier something about it's carried over generation after generation. Can we, I know it can't be quick, but as quick as you can,
Okay.
just in this episode, touch on that.
Okay. Well, certainly our history in this country is different than any other people because we were intentionally, very deliberately made into an object rather than a human being. And I'll go back to how the Catholic Church issued various bulls or edicts that said that Spain and Portugal had the right to capture, enslave, do anything they wanted to other people who were not Christian, right? Not Catholic. And of course, they took that and they looked at people who were of African descent as being non-Christian, even though Christianity started in ancient Africa. And they used this whole idea about just really dehumanizing and objectifying people of African descent and also other people of color, but particularly us. But in this country, there were laws created that specifically targeted Black folk as being lesser than human, not being able to vote, to own property, even after we were quote unquote emancipated and given certain quote unquote privileges or rights. So this white supremacist mentality is totally antithetical to who we are as a people, because they tend to objectify people rather than seeing people who are non-white as being human. So when we think about the how the slave ships that had transported over the Africans were constructed, it was totally anti-human and very, very anti-Black. When we think about how families were separated, destroyed, and even when many of our ancestors were attempting to learn how to read, the hands would be chopped off, or learning how to write. You know, we had all kinds of ways in which we were tormented. In fact, there's one book by Brother Kendi. He's the guy who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, but his first book was Stamped from the Beginning. That has a wonderful history, if you have the stomach, for just how sick these Caucasians were in just seeing us as objects for them to make money off of. There's another book called The American Slave Coast, which also talks about the same issue. Both of those are complements to each other, but wonderful references in terms of being able to really understand the mentality that went into the torment of our ancestors, and also what what some of the psychological effect of that has been. There's another book by Dr.
Okay,
Quincy.
right. I know you keep giving us references,
Okay.
but can you tell us the effects that that
Yes,
have had.
yes,
I
okay,
mean, if you can
okay,
get, because
okay,
yeah,
okay,
we can
please.
get the references, but
Uh,
the effects.
okay,
As a clinician,
okay,
what kind of effect have you seen on our people
okay.
as we relate to each other as a result of all these books
Okay.
and all that stuff
Oh,
that has
okay.
happened?
Okay. As a result of this American nightmare, white folks will call it
Yes, yes,
the American dream. I would say this American nightmare. We have suffered substance abuse. We have suffered broken families. We have suffered self-esteem, very, very low self-esteem. We've experienced self-hatred because we've been so conditioned to be anti-Black. Our society is anti-Black. It teaches us to hate ourselves. So for us to create an African mindset in this European setting, as brother Haki Mahabouti said, that's a miracle for us to be able to even have this conversation, given all that our people have been through and continue to go through. So there has not been one day since our ancestors were kidnapped and enslaved that we have not been terrorized in some way, physically, economically, and on every dimension, in every institution. We find ourselves being under constant attack. And what does that do to our self-esteem? What does that do in terms of our depression? Knowing that that other people who control this country see us as being less than human, and they can shoot us when they feel like it, and they feel like it a lot. So we have all of this to constantly deal with, in addition to the constant struggle of just being a human being on this planet. So we have never been safe in this country. We have never been safe in the diaspora because white people have attacked us not just because of hate, but also the fact that they hate to see us be successful. That's the other manifestation of this illness that we have to constantly deal with. So we find ourselves being under constant siege. So we have to be on the defensive. So our blood pressure goes up. We may, in fact, ingest a lot of unhealthy things because we're just trying to nurture ourselves in some way. Sometimes we use alcohol too much. Sometimes we use other drugs. But it's all about trying to self-soothe. And that there's no self-soothing from those things, which are foreign to our bodies, and also foreign to our spirit. And sometimes, even with that, we have to deal with all of the contradictions. We're told that, and then this goes back to most of our social upbringing. Jesus is white. He was hung on the cross. This white guy who looked just like the people who enslaved our ancestors, and we're supposed to worship this white icon. It's like, the contradictions that we have to deal with. And it's hard for us to deal with that because it creates so much cognitive dissonance. So somehow or another, we have to resolve that. We can either discount all of the information that we get, which would really cause us to rethink our values, or we have to incorporate some information and somehow or another resolve how is it that we're told to be good Christians, and yet the people who had enslaved our ancestors were Christian. We have so many contradictions that we have to struggle with. The same thing with Islam. Slavery, or I should say, Africans were enslaved about 1,000 years longer by the Arabs than the Europeans. That's another piece of this history that we have to deal with, the contradictions. So some of us left Christianity to go into Islam, but Islam was just as oppressive to Black folks as the Christians were. So once again, we find ourselves not being able to oftentimes resolve that. So we just kind of give up and say, I'm not going to even think about it. However, if we actually go back to our original source, to our origins, we reconnect with our own spirituality as a people. And this has nothing to do with religion. It has more to do with our connection with the Creator. If we're able to re-establish that in a way that helps us to resolve some of these contradictions. And I don't care if it's African spirituality as it's practiced in some ways, because all of the various spiritual all of the various faith-based traditions have human beings involved who can also be exploitive. And we have to be mindful of that. So we have to, once again, deal with this contradiction, which sometimes can take a lifetime if you choose to actually look at it.
Actually deal with it, huh?
Yeah, yeah. There's so many contradictions.
I
So
keep getting
many.
these little signs about, we running out of time. However,
Yeah.
I'd like for you to kind of like conclude. I mean, we are really an amazing people.
Yes, we are.
Still be
Yes, we are.
sane with all the psychosis that goes on, with all the things that are shot at us, and we still believe that we can and will overcome, that we will be victorious. So, on that note, what would you, you were saying that spirituality is one of the things that has helped us to cope with all we've been through and all that we're still going through because
Yeah.
the chickens are coming home to roost or whatever, however that saying goes. As we go through this, are there more tips that you can give us, one or two? Because we would like to hear from our audience and see if they have any questions that they would like to ask. Because the last time, we really
Yes, we
did.
only have a few more minutes to go, so I don't want to interrupt both of you all, but so if we can answer that, and then we'll do a summation, and then we will be able to go into the Q&A section.
Well, I just want one tip other than the spiritual part, because that's almost like saying go pray about it. You know what I mean?
Well,
So if you could
yeah.
just give us one more.
Okay. The tip I would offer is that we are a resilient people. We have a legacy of beating the odds against the odds when we have the will to do so. So that's the biggest tip, just realizing who and what we came from, being willing to take the time to really study ourselves, because we have thousands of examples about our ancestors who have always overcome the obstacles. And we come from them. So everything that we're being presented with, they dealt with even far worse. So being able to really draw strength from that knowledge about who we are as a people can also be a source of strength. But we have to know ourselves.
That's so true. Well, Dr. Tutmase, on behalf of Black Gold Nation, Sister Fabu, and myself, thank you for the insightful information that we have received today. It really was great. My hope is that as a people, we begin to see the connection between our spiritual self and our mental wellness, so we can actively engage in getting the help we need. I hope that. But when I was thinking about that, I remember Jaramogi Baby Ajaman said, as a people, that we were psychologically sick due to the trauma of slavery. And we never really dealt with that. And that's kind of what you addressed. And I was wondering, what are some of the things that we could do? And I started thinking about Black Gold Nation. We have the Emotional Emancipation Circle program, which is a small part of something that we can do to start dealing with healing ourselves. Very briefly, in 30 seconds or less, can you kind of explain what that program is? That's one that you facilitate along with Queen Mother Leona, this Emotional Emancipation Circle.
Yes. Emotional emancipation circles were created by the Community Healing Network around 2001. The Association of Black Psychologists became involved about 12 years ago, and we helped them to really fine-tune their curriculum in terms of the healing circles. The EECs are specifically designed to address how African Americans can overcome the lie of white supremacy and the lie of Black inferiority, and how we can heal ourselves. This is a self-help group. It's not psychotherapy. Anything that is therapeutic that helps is good. This is just a support group for our people. We would say that the Caucasians, the Asian Pacific Islanders, the Native Americans, etc., all need to do their own healing. This is a space for us to do our healing.
Okay, and so Black Gold Nation, you have been doing this program within the Black Gold Nation media with Queen Mother Leona. What day is that on?
It's on Tuesdays from 6:30 to 7:30 Mountain Standard Time.
Okay, so everyone, you can go to our website, blackgoldnation.com, for more information about the Emotional Emancipation Circle. We're going to go ahead and move into our Q&A from the audience. Brother Tamani, we're at the Q&A portion. Do we have any questions for Dr. Tutmose from the audience at this time?
Yes, ma'am. We have several, most of which came from different Facebook pages. But before I get into those questions, does anybody who's with us now, we have a pretty good audience, I guess I'll say, of people who are with us watching live. So before I get to the questions that were posted, does anybody who is with us now live via Zoom have any questions for Dr. Tutmose before I get to the list of questions that I have? Anybody? Any questions going once? Any questions going twice? Okie dokie, I give you a chance. All right, so before I get into the questions, let me first say thank Dr. Tutmose for being here. He has obviously a wealth of information, understanding, knowledge, answers, and solutions that we absolutely must get to and get through if we're going to be free. I want to add that Dr. Tutmose is also a candidate in the Black Gold National Leadership Election. He's running to head up our National Wellness Department, which includes the physical health, mental health, and spiritual health divisions. It's very, very, very important that we understand that we cannot be empowered or free without dealing with all the stuff that this brother is talking about. So we can't have a nation that's trying to move forward and build without minds like his that are a part of the same vision and mission, which of course is to build a Black nation with power. So it's very important that people understand the kind of people that we have who are attached to and coming on board into Black Gold Nation. Okay, first question, Dr. Tutmose, where does the term BIPOC come from, and why that term as opposed to African descendants of slavery, ADOS, or Foundational Black Americans, FBA?
Well, let me say that I'm not sure exactly where the term BIPOC came from. It just reminds me once again of the term minority that was so commonplace back in the 60s. Okay. So rather than Black people and Indigenous people and people of Mexican descent and et cetera, being called what they were, white folks have always had this tendency to want to lump us in and use some acronym and some term. Okay, so now we're BIPOC. I'll say, I ain't no damn BIPOC. I'm an African. I am a person of African descent. Okay, the native people, they are of their nation, and whatever they identify that as being. People of Asian Pacific Islander descent, we need to call them that rather than we lump everybody in together and say, oh, you're a BIPOC. To me, that's just like saying back in the 60s, oh, you're a minority. I hated that term then, and I still hate it now, because we have to honor people by calling them by what they choose to be called.
Amen.
Okay.
Minority was a negative term as opposed
but
to
y'all, if there was a person, there was a Black, that term was coined by B.B. Campbell Moore, Black.
Yeah, B.B. Campbell Moore.
She coined that, and it is Black Indigenous. She coined that to separate it from white people. I mean, we're never going to be satisfied with other people naming us, which is why we do Kujichagulia, self-determination. But she was a Black woman, a sister, who wanted to break away from the Caucasians' definition and the Caucasian trying to lump us in with them when she said people of color, Indigenous people, all have something different. And BIPOC actually is separating all the different ethnic groups, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, be they Asian, Hispanic. That's why I asked you the question that we have common things, but in BIPOC, it talks about the uniqueness of each group of people. So her
use that term I'm sorry,
okay. And I'll say, I get it.
It's not, I mean, I know you said you didn't know where, you weren't sure or where, but just look up, so we don't take up more time on it, just look up B.B. Campbell Moore and the organization BIPOC.
Yes. I heard that definition some time ago, but my point is just that rather than, once again, using large categories, let's call people what they are. Call me Black, call the native people, Indigenous, whatever, but we always get into trouble because we're doing the same thing that the Caucasians have always done to us. They lump us all together rather than us being able to say, let's honor each of these communities by speaking their name.
Right.
Okay, let's go to
Who
the next
what they
question
are.
so that we can
And
have.
really honor them.
Next question.
Let's go to the next question. I kind of agree with you, Dr. Tubman Sace, but we're going to go to the next question just so that we can get as many questions as possible.
Amen. Next question. If clinicians today are not trained or properly prepared to address the distinct aspects of healing for Black people, what do we do about our individual and shared trauma?
Okay, a couple of things. Clinicians overall can address trauma in the general sense because they're trained to do that. Most of them are. However, when it comes down to dealing with this historical racialized trauma that we have, in addition to whatever personal trauma that we may have experienced through, physical abuse, sexual abuse, dealing with white supremacy, and on and on and on. There's lots of different sources of trauma, certainly. But the issue is that since they're not trained overall to address our issues, there have been various attempts throughout the years to help remedy that. For example, the Association of Black Psychologists, and I'll talk about what happens here in Colorado. This happens in other states as well. We actually train psychiatrists, social workers, licensed marriage and family therapists, other psychologists on how to work effectively with people of African descent. Now, I share that with you because while on one hand, we know that their graduate school training is highly deficient in terms of being able to work with Black populations, we can actually train them to do less harm. It would be wonderful if they could do no harm, but at least we can train them to do less harm. Okay. That's about the best that we can do right now because it is really incumbent upon the graduate programs, particularly these clinical programs, to provide proper training because we have tons of clinicians entering the field who are totally ill-prepared and dealing with cross-cultural issues. They don't have
proper training is the key to this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if it doesn't happen in graduate school, then the community has to offer it through continuing education or some other ways to train them up to speed. Now, on an individual basis, the one thing that we can do is to help each other by overcoming the stigmas in dealing with mental health challenges. Unless we overcome the stigma, some of us will never seek help unless it's in a crisis mode. And that's the worst place and the worst time to get help. That's because we can actually be more proactive and begin to address these issues before things get out of hand. Then we need some very radical type of intervention, okay? The other thing that we can do is to begin to take advantage of the various community-based support groups that we can create within our own community. We don't have to necessarily wait for someone to do this for us. The EECs, for example, is just one of several other types of self-help efforts that we have created for ourselves. So being able to avail ourselves of those opportunities can help, but we have to be willing to recognize when one of us are in distress. Oftentimes, we don't ask the question, or we answer in a very polite way. For example, out of a common courtesy, you see someone who you ask, how are you doing? And the common courtesy response is, I'm good, I'm doing well. Now, how about if someone were to say, I feel like shit. I'm really upset. I had this happen to me and that happened to me. Many people just shut down and say, well, I just asked you how you were. I did not really want to hear all that. So we have to be able to be authentic as we interact with each other. We have to be willing to see each other. As we talked about earlier, we have to be willing to see each other.
Got it. Okay, next question. You quoted Dr. I think this was from Chancellor Williams, who said we have lost our African minds.
We've been out of our African minds.
We're out of our African minds. Okay, amen. So the question is, how do we reconnect? But I'm going to say, okay, how do we reconnect or get back into our African minds?
Okay, very, very briefly, there's a process. we have to be willing to do the hard work. The hard work means that we have to begin to study, read some credible sources. Go on YouTube. There's tons and tons of discussions by people like Chancellor Williams, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Asa Hilliard, and on and on and on. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, they really can enlighten us about these issues. But we have to be willing to look at the credible sources. There's a ton of stuff which is garbage on YouTube. But there are some very, very good credible sources that we can see for free. If we have the money, we can actually buy some books, but there's nothing keeping us from looking at some of their discussions on YouTube. That's one thing. Back in the 70s and 80s, we used to have Black History study groups. That was another way that we could come together in some collective fashion and study and learn not only from those resources, but also from each other's experiences. There's some things that we can do that really does not cost any money. That's one way to reclaim our African mind.
Cool. Okay.
And then really, lastly, being able to understand the value system that allowed our ancestors to actually create the first civilizations on the planet and to raise the pyramids from the deserts, sands in ancient Kemet. There's things that we can do that we can reclaim. Okay, there you go.
Okay, cool. All right. So next question, and there's only two more. You said, Dr. Tupman say, and people say this often, we are a spiritual people. Yeah. What does that mean? What does that mean that we are a spiritual people?
Well, one way of looking at that is that we have as a core of who we are as a people, that the essence of our reality is spirit. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience on this planet, in this physical form. And the creator, by whatever name you choose to call the creator, made us. We have that connection through this life force, which actually created the universe, and being able to realize, that we're connected to not only the creator, but to each other and all living things. So we're part of a living system. It's not just that we're individuals. That's what the Europeans say. They're just individuals, and that the source of all meaning is physical things you can see, feel, touch, measure, all that stuff. That's their reality. Our reality is spiritual. Being able to have at our core that connection with our creator and also with each other and other living things. That's what I mean by spirituality, not religion.
Yeah, amen. And it's a big difference. Okay, last question. You said, quote, you said those who are working with those clinicians have, quote, an ethical responsibility to know, end quote, about the people they're working with. So the question is that possible? If you're not, and I'm not going to use the term BIPOC because it includes people of color, and that could be a big group, but if you're not an African descended person who understands our trauma because you've lived or you are living our trauma, can one really know our trauma and help if they haven't experienced that trauma from our perspective? Is that even possible?
Well,
good question.
Let me say that on a human,
that one was mine.
Okay. That's a good one.
Well, okay, on a human level, we can experience each other's emotions. Okay, we're just wired like that. Even white folks, they're wired like that, even though they kind of have gotten away from their own humanity. But yes, we can connect with people on a very emotional level because we are Homo sapiens sapien. Now, whether or not we can experience, I should say, whether or not Caucasians can experience the trauma, historical trauma that we experience as a result of this ma'afa or this enslavement, I would say, no, they can't. But they have some idea of what trauma is like because many of them have been able to work with trauma victims, people who have experienced various traumas in certain ways. But there's nothing like that historical trauma that we have experienced or our Native brothers and sisters. Nothing comes close to that. So being able to experience the emotions of someone else is something that we can do through empathy. Yes, we can do it, but we cannot truly experience what someone else has, particularly on this historical, racialized level.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tutmase. I really appreciate you going into very good detail about our spiritual selves in terms of our mental health wellness. And I also want to thank our audience for all the great questions that we just received. And we really appreciate you being interactive with us. And that's what we really want is questions from our audience. So we always try to make time for that. I will be discussing our next show in a minute, but Sister Fabu, do you have any post comments from our audience at this time that you want to do as a wrap up? Or if not, I could go straight to announcements.
I just want to say stay tuned. Third Wednesday every month, we try to, I would say tackle, because it is tackle, because we do get kind of deep. Subjects like this, because it is spiritual Sankofa, we got to look back and bring back to mind. And like Dr. Tutmase said, it's a process to get back to where we are. And we are trying to go, we've taken these shows to lead us into the process, which means there's more coming.
And if I can make just one last comment very quickly, that's that the trauma is in our genes, but so is the healing. The healing and the genius is also in our genes. We have to reach back and reclaim that rather than being stuck on the trauma, which is only 500 years or so, in contrast to the thousands and thousands of years and millions of years that we existed before this traumatic experience in this American nightmare.
Ashe.
And very quickly, I'm going to go into announcements and then we will have a quick discussion of our upcoming shows before we close out. Just a second. Black Gold Nation's announcements include our podcast, which are How to Build a Black Nation with Power every Wednesday, except each third Wednesday of the month is this show, Spiritual Sankofa, A Stolen Legacy. The Revolutionary Code every Thursday of the month, and Cinematic Connections for Revolutionary Change, which airs every other Saturday morning. Be sure to visit us at blackgoldnation.com and choose the BG Media tab for listings of all our podcasts. Our events are the Black Gold Nation Leadership Election, August the 26th through the 28th, 2022. And our first Black Gold National Leadership Election inauguration, October the 27th through the 30th in Houston, Texas. Once again, go to blackgoldnation.com, choose the election tab to get more information on the election or joining our leadership team. You have to stop sharing the screen, sorry. Okay, there we go. I just wanted to give a quick update on our upcoming show, as Fabu mentioned, is every third Wednesday of the month. And we are going to tackle the topic on culture, which when we just talked about the Zulu terms of Butu and Savannah, those were an example of a type of culture that the group thought process and the way they dress one another was part of their Zulu culture. So we will be discussing what is culture, the difference in cultures, the importance of knowing and acknowledging our culture, and much more. It is a lot to present, and Fundi Fabu, Sister Fabu and I thought about it, and we think it's going to take about 2 or 3 shows to cover. So we're asking you all to tune in with us. So Sister Fabu, Brother Tamani, who is the founder of Black Gold Nation Movement, and I are looking forward to you signing into our upcoming podcast. Once again, thank you, Sister Fabu, Brother Tamani, Dr. Tutmase, and our audience for being with us today. We will see you next month.
Bye.
Amen and Ashe. Y'all have a good one. Thank you.
Glad to have y'all with us. Thank you, Dr. Tutmase. Great show.
Thank you, my sister.
Yeah, you did all right. You did all right. You don't get a beat.
Good night.
Y'all have a good one. God bless.
Bye, bless.
Bye-bye.